Dr. Victoria Chen stumbled out of the medical licensing board hearing, her $300,000 a year anesthesiology career over forever. 18 ethics violations. Medical license permanently revoked. Criminal charges pending. She looked across the room and saw me sitting calmly in the back row. The same navy suit I'd worn to our wedding 12 years earlier. I gave her a slight nod. 14 months. That's how long she'd spent systematically destroying my medical practice through false accusations and fabricated evidence. Now she was unemployable in medicine anywhere in North America. But before we continue, please subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment where you are watching from. 26 months ago, I was Dr. David Martinez, a 52-year-old orthopedic surgeon with a thriving practice in Phoenix, Arizona. I specialized in sports medicine and joint reconstruction, with a patient roster that included professional athletes, weekend warriors, and elderly patients seeking to maintain their mobility and independence. My practice, Phoenix Orthopedic and Sports Medicine, generated approximately $2.1 million in annual revenue. I employed 8 full-time staff members, maintained privileges at 3 major hospitals, and had built a reputation over 15 years as one of the most skilled and ethical orthopedic surgeons in the Southwest. I was also married to Dr. Victoria Chen, a highly skilled anesthesiologist who worked at Phoenix General Hospital. On paper, we were the perfect medical power couple, 2 physicians at the top of their fields, combined household income of nearly $650,000 annually, beautiful home in Scottsdale, successful careers, and what everyone assumed was a solid marriage. What nobody knew was that Victoria had been growing increasingly resentful of my practice's success. While her anesthesiology work was steady and well compensated, she was essentially a hospital employee working shifts. My practice was entrepreneurial. I owned the business, employed staff, controlled my schedule, and had built something that would continue generating wealth long after I stopped practicing. More importantly, I had something she desperately wanted: professional independence and the respect that came with being known as an expert in my field. Victoria was skilled at her job, but anesthesiologists work behind the scenes. They're crucial to surgical success, but patients rarely remember their names. Surgeons get the recognition, the reputation, the professional status that Victoria craved. The first sign of trouble came in February, almost 2 years ago. We were at a medical conference in Las Vegas, and I was presenting a paper on a new joint reconstruction technique I'd developed. The presentation went well, standing ovation, several colleagues expressing interest in collaborating, and 2 medical device companies approaching me about consulting opportunities. That night, as we sat at the hotel bar celebrating, Victoria made a comment that should have been a red flag. "It must be nice," she said, swirling her wine, "being the star of the show. Having everyone hang on your every word." "You're just as accomplished," I replied. "Your work in cardiac anesthesia is groundbreaking. Nobody knows my name, David. When patients wake up, they thank the surgeon. They never even remember the anesthesiologist who kept them alive during the procedure." I thought she was just having a moment of professional frustration. Every doctor goes through periods of questioning their career path, wondering if they chose the right specialty. I didn't realize that Victoria's resentment was deeper and more dangerous than professional jealousy. Over the next 6 months, small things started happening at my practice that seemed like coincidences at the time. Patient files would occasionally go missing, requiring us to recreate documentation. Computer systems would experience unexplained glitches that required expensive IT repairs. Medical supply orders would be mysteriously cancelled, forcing last-minute scrambles to maintain inventory. My practice manager, Linda Rodriguez, mentioned these issues during our monthly financial reviews, but we attributed them to the normal growing pains of expanding the practice. What we didn't realize was that Victoria was gaining access to our systems during her visits to my office, subtly sabotaging operations while appearing to be the supportive wife bringing dinner or stopping by to say hello. The real crisis began in August. I came home from a particularly challenging surgery, a complete knee reconstruction on a 19-year-old college basketball player who had suffered a devastating injury, to find Victoria packing suitcases in our bedroom. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I'm leaving, David. I've rented an apartment. I need space to think about our marriage." I sat down on the bed, exhausted from the surgery and now facing the collapse of my personal life. "Victoria, if you're unhappy, we should talk about it. Work through whatever problems we're having." She stopped packing and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculated, almost predatory. "The problem, David, is that you're selfish. You built your precious practice without any consideration for my career, my goals, my ambitions. Everything has always been about what Dr. David Martinez wants. That's not true. I've supported your career completely. When you wanted to specialize in cardiac anesthesia, I encouraged you. When you needed additional training, I covered our expenses so you could focus on education. You covered expenses with money from your practice. Money I had no stake in, no control over, no claim to. That's when I realized this wasn't about marriage counseling or working through relationship issues. This was about money and control. Victoria, we can discuss the practice, talk about ways to make you feel more involved in our financial decisions. It's too late for that, David. I've already spoken to an attorney. She handed me a manila folder containing separation papers and a detailed financial disclosure demand. She wasn't just leaving, she was positioning herself for a divorce that would give her claim to half of everything I'd built. But that was just the beginning of her strategy. What I didn't know was that Victoria had spent the previous 3 months consulting with not just a divorce attorney, but also a medical malpractice attorney, a private investigator who specialized in professional misconduct cases, and a forensic accountant who analyzed medical practice finances for divorce proceedings. She wasn't just leaving our marriage. She was planning to destroy my medical practice so thoroughly that there would be nothing left to divide in the divorce. The first attack came 2 weeks after she moved out. I received a certified letter from the Arizona Medical Board informing me that a complaint had been filed against my medical license. The complaint alleged that I had performed unnecessary surgeries on 3 patients, falsified medical records to justify procedures, and fraudulently billed insurance companies for services not rendered. I read that letter 3 times, trying to process what I was seeing. These weren't minor complaints or patient dissatisfaction issues. These were serious allegations that could result in license suspension, criminal charges, and the complete destruction of my career. The patients named in the complaint were ones I remembered clearly. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, 67, who had received a hip replacement after suffering a fall that shattered her hip joint. The surgery had been completely successful, and she'd returned to her normal activities within 6 months. James Morrison, 34, a marathon runner who had needed ACL reconstruction after a training injury. Again, successful surgery, full recovery, return to competitive running. Sarah Kim, 23, a gymnast who had required shoulder surgery after a training accident that had torn multiple ligaments. All 3 surgeries had been medically necessary, well documented, and successful. The patients had been satisfied with their outcomes and had even referred family members to my practice. Someone had fabricated evidence to make these routine, successful procedures appear fraudulent. I immediately contacted my medical malpractice insurance company and retained Dr. Patricia Wells, an attorney who specialized in medical licensing defense. Dr. Wells reviewed the complaint and the supporting documentation that had been submitted to the medical board. "David, someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to make these cases appear problematic," she told me during our first meeting. The documentation includes altered medical records, fabricated patient complaints, and what appears to be expert testimony from a physician who claims these surgeries were unnecessary. "That's impossible. I had the original files, the preoperative imaging, the surgical notes, the postoperative follow-ups. Everything is documented according to standard medical practice. I believe you. But someone with access to medical records and knowledge of medical documentation has created a very sophisticated false case against you. That's when it hit me. Victoria had access to Phoenix General Hospital's medical records system. As an anesthesiologist, she had legitimate reasons to access surgical files for patients she'd worked with. She could have obtained my patients' information, studied their cases, and figured out how to manipulate the documentation to create the appearance of misconduct. But I needed proof. Suspecting your ex-wife of professional sabotage and proving it in a way that would satisfy medical boards and courts were two very different things. Over the next month, while Dr. Wells worked to defend me against the medical board complaint, I began my own investigation. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Thompson, a former FBI agent who specialized in white-collar crime and professional misconduct cases. Dr. Martinez, Marcus said during our first meeting, "What you're describing sounds like a systematic attempt to destroy your medical practice. If your ex-wife is behind this, she's not just trying to hurt you personally, she's attempting to eliminate your primary source of income before the divorce proceedings. Can you prove that? If she's doing what you think she's doing, she's leaving digital footprints. Medical records access logs, computer forensics, financial transactions related to hiring attorneys and investigators. The question is whether she's been careful enough to cover her tracks." Marcus began investigating while I focused on defending my practice and my medical license. The medical board investigation was consuming enormous amounts of time and money, legal fees, expert witness costs, administrative expenses. Even if I eventually proved my innocence, the investigation itself was damaging my reputation and my practice. Patients started canceling appointments. Referring physicians began sending cases to other surgeons. Hospital administrators started asking questions about my credentials and standing. The medical board complaint hadn't been proven, but in the medical field, the accusation itself was enough to create doubt. My practice revenue dropped 35% in 2 months. I had to lay off 2 staff members and reduce hours for others. The thriving practice I'd spent 15 years building was being systematically destroyed by false allegations. But Marcus was making progress on the investigation. 3 months after Victoria left, he provided me with the first concrete evidence of her sabotage campaign. "She's been accessing patient records at Phoenix General for patients who were never under her care," Marcus reported. "The hospital's computer logs show she accessed files for 17 of your patients over the past 4 months, patients she had no medical reason to review. How is that possible? Hospitals have strict privacy controls. She's been using her legitimate access credentials to browse files, but she's been careful to access them during busy periods when lots of medical staff are logged into the system. She's also been accessing files for patients she worked with months or years ago, making it look like routine follow-up research." Marcus handed me a thick folder of computer forensics reports. But here's what she didn't count on. Every access leaves a digital timestamp. When we map her access patterns against the complaints filed against you, the correlation is perfect. She accessed Mrs. Patterson's file 2 days before the complaint was filed. James Morrison's file 3 days before. Sarah Kim's file 1 day before. This was the evidence I needed to prove Victoria was behind the false allegations. But it was also evidence of serious criminal behavior. Accessing patient medical records without authorization was a federal crime under HIPAA regulations. Using those records to file false complaints against a physician was fraud. Victoria wasn't just trying to hurt me, she was committing multiple felonies. "Marcus, I want you to document everything. Every illegal access, every false document, every fraudulent claim. I want a complete record of her criminal activity. Dr. Martinez, are you sure you want to go down this path? If we expose what she's done, she's going to face serious criminal charges. Prison time. Loss of her medical license. I thought about the patients who had canceled appointments because they were afraid to see a doctor under investigation. I thought about my staff members who had lost their jobs because of false allegations. I thought about the 15 years I'd spent building a practice that helped people recover from injuries and return to active lives. She made her choice when she decided to file false allegations against me. Now she gets to face the consequences of that choice. Over the next 6 months, Marcus and I built a comprehensive case documenting Victoria's campaign of professional sabotage. The evidence was overwhelming. She had illegally accessed medical records for 23 of my patients, spending hours reviewing cases and looking for any procedure that could be presented as questionable. She had contacted former patients, using information from their medical records to suggest that their surgeries might have been unnecessary and that they should consider filing malpractice claims. She had hired a physician consultant to provide expert testimony claiming my procedures were not medically justified, paying him $15,000 to review cases and provide opinions that supported her allegations. Most damaging of all, she had actually altered digital medical records in the hospital system, changing dates, modifying notes, and deleting documentation that supported the medical necessity of procedures she was challenging. But Victoria's campaign wasn't limited to the initial medical board complaint. Over the 8 months following her departure, she filed or encouraged others to file 3 additional medical board complaints alleging various forms of misconduct. For medical malpractice lawsuits claiming unnecessary procedures and poor outcomes. 2 complaints to hospital administrators questioning my competence and suggesting I should lose my surgical privileges. 1 complaint to my malpractice insurance company claiming I had provided false information on my policy applications. Each complaint required expensive legal defense, consumed enormous amounts of time, and further damaged my professional reputation. My practice revenue continued to decline as the allegations mounted. Other physicians began avoiding professional association with me, afraid that the controversy would damage their own reputations. Victoria was systematically destroying everything I had built, using her medical knowledge and access to create sophisticated false cases that were difficult and expensive to defend against. But what Victoria didn't know was that I had been documenting everything. Every false allegation, every illegal records access, every fraudulent document, every criminal action she had taken in her campaign to destroy my practice. While she was focused on attacking me, I was building a case that would destroy her completely. The turning point came 11 months after Victoria left. I had successfully defended against 2 of the medical board complaints, and my attorney Dr. Wells had filed motions to dismiss the others based on the evidence of fabricated documentation. The malpractice lawsuits were falling apart as expert witnesses reviewed the actual medical records and concluded that all the procedures had been medically appropriate and well executed. Victoria's false allegations were collapsing, but she had escalated her attacks. She filed a complaint with the FBI, claiming that I was operating a healthcare fraud scheme involving unnecessary surgeries and fraudulent billing. She provided them with a detailed analysis of my practice's finances, claiming that the high volume of procedures I performed was evidence of criminal activity. That FBI complaint was her biggest mistake. Federal investigations of healthcare fraud are thorough and methodical. FBI agents don't just review allegations, they conduct comprehensive audits of medical practices, analyze every procedure, review every bill, and interview every patient. When FBI agent Sarah Coleman contacted me about the investigation, I provided her with everything: the evidence of Victoria's illegal records access, the documentation of her false allegations, the proof that she had been systematically sabotaging my practice for over a year. Dr. Martinez, Agent Coleman said after reviewing the evidence, "What your ex-wife has done isn't just divorce-related harassment. She's committed serious federal crimes. Healthcare fraud, identity theft, computer crimes, HIPAA violations. We're looking at potential prison time of 10 to 15 years. What happens now? We're going to conduct our own investigation of your practice to verify that her allegations are false. But we're also going to investigate her for the crimes she's committed in making these false allegations. The FBI investigation of my practice took 4 months. They reviewed every patient file, analyzed every procedure, interviewed dozens of patients, and audited every financial record. Their conclusion was unequivocal: my practice was clean, my procedures were medically appropriate, and my billing was accurate. But their investigation of Victoria revealed the full scope of her criminal activity. She hadn't just illegally accessed patient records, she had systematically stolen protected health information for 47 patients over an 18-month period. She had used that stolen information to file false reports to multiple government agencies. She had forged medical documents and submitted them as evidence in legal proceedings. She had committed identity theft by accessing computer systems using other physicians' credentials. Most seriously, she had actually altered patient medical records in the hospital's electronic system, changing critical medical information that could have endangered patient care. This wasn't just harassment or divorce tactics, this was criminal activity that put patients at risk. The FBI arrested Victoria at Phoenix General Hospital while she was preparing for surgery. She was led out of the operating room in handcuffs, in full view of her colleagues, charged with 18 federal crimes related to healthcare fraud, computer crimes, and identity theft. The local medical community was stunned. Dr. Victoria Chen, respected anesthesiologist, had been arrested for systematically falsifying medical records and filing fraudulent complaints against her ex-husband. The story made the front page of the Arizona Republic and was covered by every major news outlet in Phoenix. But I wasn't done with Victoria yet. Her criminal activity had cost me far more than just legal fees and lost revenue. She had damaged my professional reputation, destroyed relationships with colleagues, and caused significant emotional distress. I wanted complete accountability for what she had done. Working with my attorney, we filed comprehensive civil lawsuits against Victoria for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, tortious interference with business relationships, and conversion of business assets. We documented the financial damage to my practice, over $650,000 in lost revenue, legal fees, and business disruption. We also filed complaints with the Arizona Medical Board and the American Society of Anesthesiologists, providing complete documentation of her criminal activity and professional misconduct. Both organizations launched their own investigations and disciplinary proceedings. The civil lawsuit took 8 months to resolve. Victoria's criminal defense attorneys advised her to settle rather than risk additional exposure in a public trial. She agreed to pay $525,000 in damages, essentially her entire retirement savings and investment portfolio. The medical licensing board hearing took another 6 months. The board reviewed the evidence of her criminal activity, her fraudulent filings, and her patient safety violations. Their decision was unanimous: permanent revocation of her medical license, with no possibility of reapplication. The criminal case took the longest to resolve. Victoria initially pled not guilty to all charges, apparently believing she could convince a jury that her actions were justified by marital problems and concerns about my practice. But as the evidence mounted and the strength of the FBI's case became clear, her attorneys advised her to accept a plea agreement. She ultimately pled guilty to 11 felony charges and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was ordered to pay $127,000 in restitution to cover the costs of the investigations she had caused. But the most satisfying part of Victoria's downfall was watching her realize that her campaign to destroy my practice had completely backfired. By the time she was sentenced, my practice had not only recovered but had actually grown stronger than before her attacks. The FBI investigation had essentially provided my practice with a clean bill of health from federal law enforcement. Patients and referring physicians knew that I had been thoroughly investigated and cleared of any wrongdoing. The publicity around Victoria's arrest had actually increased awareness of my practice and brought in new patients who admired how I had handled the false allegations with professionalism and integrity. My practice revenue increased by 23% in the year following Victoria's arrest. I hired additional staff, expanded our services, and opened a second location. The attempt to destroy my career had actually made it stronger and more successful than ever. Meanwhile, Victoria lost everything. Her medical license, her career, her income, her savings, her reputation, and her freedom. She was unemployable in healthcare and faced years of rebuilding her life after prison with a felony record and no professional qualifications. The divorce proceedings, which had been delayed pending the criminal cases, were concluded quickly once Victoria was convicted. The prenuptial agreement we had signed protected most of my practice assets, and her criminal activity had eliminated any claim she might have had to marital property. She received nothing in the divorce settlement. Today, 3 years later, I'm Dr. David Martinez, owner of Phoenix Orthopedic and Sports Medicine, one of the most successful orthopedic practices in Arizona. My annual revenue has grown to over $2.8 million. I employ 15 staff members and maintain privileges at 5 hospitals. I've been elected to leadership positions in several professional organizations and am regularly invited to speak at medical conferences about practice management and professional ethics. I'm also remarried to Dr. Lisa Thompson, an emergency medicine physician who understands the demands and rewards of medical practice. Lisa and I work together occasionally when her patients need orthopedic consultations, but we maintain completely separate practices and finances. She's successful in her own right and has no interest in controlling or interfering with my business. The experience with Victoria taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation, protecting professional assets, and understanding the difference between supporting a partner and enabling their destructive behavior. Victoria served 3 years of her 4-year sentence and was released 6 months ago. She's working as a medical device sales representative, one of the few healthcare-adjacent jobs available to someone with her background and criminal record. She earns about $45,000 a year, compared to the $300,000 she made as an anesthesiologist. She'll never practice medicine again. She'll never have the professional status and recognition she envied in my career. She'll never recover the financial security she destroyed through her own criminal choices. Sometimes I receive updates about her through mutual acquaintances in the medical community. She apparently tells people that I destroyed her career through vindictive prosecution. She claims she was just trying to protect patients from what she believed were inappropriate procedures. These explanations don't acknowledge that FBI investigations found no evidence of inappropriate procedures in my practice. They don't explain why she illegally accessed patient records she had no medical reason to review. They don't justify altering medical records in hospital computer systems or filing false complaints based on fabricated evidence. Victoria destroyed her own career through criminal activity designed to eliminate my income before our divorce. She gambled that she could fabricate enough false allegations to force me out of medicine, leaving only marital assets to be divided in divorce proceedings. She lost that gamble completely. The question people ask me most frequently is whether I feel guilty about the consequences Victoria faced. Whether 4 years in prison and permanent loss of her medical license was too harsh a punishment for someone who was just trying to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. My answer is simple: Victoria wasn't just trying to gain divorce advantage. She committed serious crimes that endangered patients, damaged the integrity of medical records, and undermined trust in the healthcare system. She used her position as a physician to access confidential patient information for criminal purposes. She filed false reports with government agencies, wasting resources that should have been used to investigate legitimate cases of medical misconduct. Most importantly, her actions had real victims. My patients who canceled appointments and delayed necessary care because they were afraid to see a doctor under investigation. My staff members who lost their jobs because of false allegations. Other physicians who now face increased scrutiny and skepticism because Victoria's false allegations contributed to distrust of the medical profession. Victoria's punishment wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. She made deliberate choices to commit serious crimes, and she faced the legal consequences of those choices. The fact that her criminal activity was motivated by marital problems doesn't excuse or minimize the harm she caused to patients, healthcare institutions, and the medical profession. I don't feel guilty about Victoria's consequences because I didn't create them. She created them through her own criminal choices. I simply made sure that her crimes were properly documented and reported to the appropriate authorities. The real tragedy of Victoria's story is that she had everything she needed for a successful, fulfilling life. She was a skilled physician with a secure, well-paying career. She had the respect of colleagues and the satisfaction of providing important medical services to patients. She had financial security and professional status. But she destroyed all of that because she couldn't accept that other people might be more successful, more recognized, or more financially secure than she was. Her jealousy and resentment drove her to commit crimes that ultimately cost her everything she actually possessed in pursuit of things that belonged to other people. I learned several important lessons from my experience with Victoria. First, success can create unexpected enemies. People you trust, including spouses and family members, may resent your achievements and look for ways to undermine or destroy what you've built. Professional success requires ongoing vigilance to protect against those who would rather tear down others than build up themselves. Second, documentation is crucial. Every false allegation Victoria made against me was eventually disproven because I maintained meticulous records of all my professional activities. Without those records, her false claims might have succeeded in destroying my career. Third, professional relationships matter. The colleagues, patients, and staff members who supported me during Victoria's attacks were invaluable in maintaining my practice and my reputation. Building genuine professional relationships based on competence and integrity provides protection against those who try to damage your career through false allegations. Fourth, there's a difference between supporting a partner and enabling destructive behavior. I should have recognized earlier that Victoria's resentment toward my success was becoming pathological. Instead of trying to make her feel better about her own career, I should have insisted that she address her underlying issues through professional counseling. Finally, some battles are worth fighting completely. When someone attacks your professional reputation and your ability to serve patients, you have an obligation to defend yourself thoroughly and hold the attacker accountable for their actions. Victoria's false allegations didn't just threaten my income, they threatened patient care and the integrity of the medical profession. Today, my practice continues to grow and serve patients throughout Arizona. We've treated over 3,000 patients in the past year, helping them recover from injuries, return to active lives, and maintain their independence and mobility. Every successful surgery, every satisfied patient, every life improved through orthopedic care is proof that Victoria's attempt to destroy my practice failed completely. I'm proud of how I handled Victoria's attacks. I didn't respond with anger or emotion. I didn't try to retaliate through personal attacks or public humiliation. I simply documented her criminal activity and reported it to the appropriate authorities. I let the legal system determine her guilt and impose appropriate consequences. The system worked exactly as it should. False allegations were investigated and disproven. Criminal activity was prosecuted and punished. Professional misconduct was reviewed and sanctioned. Victoria received exactly what she earned through her own choices and actions. Justice isn't always dramatic or emotionally satisfying, but it is thorough and fair. Victoria spent months planning and executing a sophisticated campaign to destroy my medical practice through false allegations and criminal activity. The legal system spent years methodically investigating her crimes, documenting her misconduct, and imposing appropriate consequences. She gambled her entire career and her freedom on her ability to destroy mine. She lost that gamble completely, and she'll spend the rest of her life living with the consequences of her criminal choices. Meanwhile, I continue practicing medicine, serving patients, and building a successful, ethical practice that contributes to my community and my profession. Victoria tried to destroy everything I had built, but she only succeeded in destroying herself. That's what real justice looks like. Not revenge, not cruelty, not emotional satisfaction, just consequences that fit the crimes and protection for the victims of those crimes. The game is over, and everyone got exactly what they deserved. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and leave a comment where you are watching from.